So, hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Handtraps and how they've fallen off in general. So, right now, I think is probably the absolute worst time for going second, just in general, not just specifically because maybe one deck is brutally overpowered or anything. It's more like all of the decks that are being released and new archetypes, new support, and whatnot, all of them are enabling you to kind of just power through or ignore hand traps entirely. And one of the really good examples, as of currently, Droll and Lockbird. So Droll and Lockbird specifically requires your opponent to add a card from the main deck to your opponent's hand. So before, this would be a lot more commonplace. So if we were to look at, for example, Super Heavy Samurai, we would go look at how many searches we have. We have like Super Heavy Samurai Soul Piercer. So it adds like twice. So after this adds once, we can just roll immediately, and the add has to be done very early on. But then there's also, I guess, Motorbike, which has to discard itself to add a card, and then Wakahushi, which sets up Benkei, which then does a cert. So that's kind of how that works. But if we go to, for example, Voiceless Voice, we have the one card combo here with low. So if we were to do, well, it wouldn't start with low, would it? No, it wouldn't. If we were to start with specifically Skull Guardian, Protector of the Voiceless Voice, plus any 7 and a way to Ritual Summon, then we would just be able to completely ignore Droll. Or something like a Centurion doesn't actually care about Droll. And even if you did Droll, it's still, like, let's assume your Droll did matter. In this case, your opponent still can search on the following turn, so on like turn 3. So with the Voiceless Voice cards in particular, we are resistant to a lot of hand traps sometimes. So that this is not like as consistent as some other decks might be, but if we have Seravis, then you cannot target any of my monsters. And the next turn, after I've set up a barrier of the Voiceless Voice, you won't be able to target my monsters once again. So, Imperm, dead. Ghost Mourner, I believe, might not target. I'm not 100% sure if Ghost Mourner does target, actually. So let's check. Ghost Mourner targets, yeah. So this wouldn't work either. So that's also, I guess, somewhat unfortunate. But yeah, so Droll, not as effective. I think Droll can be somewhat effective depending on, I guess, how many of the cards our opponent, well, how many they need to search here. So maybe we need to do like add Saphira add, or pre-prep and then Saphira add, something like that is Drollable. But if we normal summon low, that sets, or yeah, that places barrier of the Voiceless Voice, which isn't adding. Whereas before, a lot of cards actually did add instead of just like setting and stuff. So for example, if we look at Cursed Eldland right here, it doesn't even set a Golden Land spell trap, it adds it to the hand for whatever reason. And let's see, does this add? You can send 1. No, this one sends to the graveyard, so it doesn't even set or replace either. But yeah, we've essentially gotten more card effects that place from the deck, and Yubel is no exception. So Spirit of Yubel, Hydra, those guys also set, or rather they don't search, depending on your perspective, I guess. So because they don't search, Droll, not very effective. And Ash Blossom Joe Spring, also not very effective. So Ash Blossom also falling off for a variety of reasons, but if we were to break it down one way, it would be that Ash Blossom Joe Spring is simply only negating a single effect, whereas these cards have multiple effects. So if we were to do Diabellstar, sending whatever, doesn't matter, grab original Sinful Spoils to send Diabellstar if we Ash at this point, disregarding the fact that there's Hita link climb into like a Promethean Princess. We still also have to deal with the fact that this can just shuffle back the Diabellstar and then add a level 1 fire monster from the deck to the hand on the following turn. So this is somewhat of an issue, somewhat not an issue. Well, it's different, definitely different from before. So before, with what our archetypes did, like for example, if we were to look at Tri Brigade instead, you would go like 10 key, add fractal effect, and then if fractal gets ashed as the one card, you have no follow-up off of that singular fractal. You would have to top deck something on a later turn, or you would already have you would have to have the search targets that you were going to kind of try to access, that kind of thing. So you already have the engine pieces, or maybe you'd need to just raw tap deck all the starters you need. So that's essentially how it went before with Ash Blossom Joe Spring, but now with a card like Original Sinful Spoils, you don't have to top deck anymore, and you already immediately have follow-up despite this being negated. So we have some grind game and stuff, just nonsense in general. So if we go with Unchained is not like that brutal, but specifically if the conditions are right, there are no points where you can hand trap Unchained. So it's usually like a 3-card combo for that to occur. But specifically if we have Sharvara and we don't need to use this as a starter, then there is no point in this combo where you can imperm, but against the end board you'd be able to imperm, unlike Voiceless Voice, where there would be no point where you could imperm at all. And I believe Snake Eye Fire King also has something similar where you cannot hand trap well, specifically with like an imperm or veiler at all. So any targeted negate type hand trap, that kind of thing, yeah, that's not going to do anything. So that's unfortunate, I guess. So the Unchained cards, I guess, are a little bit worse in the fact that they don't have a graveyard effect like Original Sinful Spoil. So if you were to actually Ash like Escape with Unchained or Abominable Chamber of the Unchained, there's no like follow-up immediately unless you have like something, I guess, like a Sharvara or Aruha in hand as just like an extender. But a lot more cards are also not just going to be extenders or starters, but they're going to be both. Before, cards were usually exclusively starters or extenders, or your starters were also extenders, but in general, you were kind of not able to make plays despite having engine. So for example, I guess if we were to look at Unchained before the support, Aruha would be your, I guess, potentially extender, and Rikea is a starter. This is also a starter potentially, but they also require you to have another Unchained card specifically. So it can be a back row or a monster depending on like which one we have. If we have to start with Rikea, then Rikea requires us to have an Unchained spell trap specifically. So that's kind of how that worked, I guess. But now we have the additional of Sharvara here being also a starter extender, making this a lot more consistent and able to play through more hand traps. And this is pretty relevant in something like if we were to instead look at Altergeist, the amount of starters you have in that deck is like nil. You basically have none. So Multi-Faker, this is potentially an extender, like kind of, but it requires a certain starter. So we require specifically Marionetter, and then not only do we require the Marionetter, we require a third Altergeist, I think, to use the actual in-hand effect of Multi-Faker. But just in general, Marionetter plus Multi-Faker is fine as well. But the difference between this and this is that you don't have anything that is both a starter and an extender, right? So exclusively, if I want to start my combo in Altergeist, I would need to open either Meluseek or Marionetter. potentially like Malwisp can allow for extension in some situations. Like I can, for example, spoofing for the Malwisp, I can even shuffle back the Malwisp and then add Malwisp, which works, I guess. And then Malwisp summons guys back. But yeah, this is purely an extender, not a starter, because I need an Altergeist monster in the graveyard to summon to begin with, and this won't put one in there. So purely extender, purely extender. And this actually is a starter that requires an extender to combo, and then this is purely a starter, I guess, really. And just like a vital combo piece. So Meluseek searches usually Malwisp now, and that you just link climb to Promethean Princess and then Ambler Whale, and that's kind of the combo with Meluseek. But Meluseek doesn't really do a whole lot. If we look at Piergeist, this is also, I would argue, technically not a starter because this doesn't enable anything. This is just a component of the deck then. If we're talking about like one card combo kind of starter, yeah, neither of these guys are like that, really, unless you count the Promethean Princess thing with Meluseek. But aside from that, you would need a second card to play for the most part. Like Meluseek plus, I believe it's Meluseek plus Bukri is combo. I think, right? Actually, maybe it's not even combo. Maybe you need to 1-for-1 out one of these guys. But yeah, in general, you need a second card to combo. So these guys aren't just starters, they're starters that need an extender, which makes them quite a bit worse. And if we move on to looking at Maxi as well, there are a lot of decks that inherently are just going to be good against Maxi as well now because they don't require that many special summons on any given turn. And that means that your Maxi is less effective overall, of course, right? So with Centurion, for example, if I were to go through this combo line and I just want some sort of interaction and with how this deck works, where exactly can you best utilize Maxi against Centurion? So you might, let's say, start with stand up Centurion. If I really don't feel like giving any draws, right, I'm going to just special summon Primera, add a card, and you're going to chain Maxi to my special summon of Primera, and then I'll probably add, I don't know. Wake Up doesn't work here. This adds any Centurion card, so I guess I could do normal summon True Dea effect to put itself in the back row because I haven't normal summoned yet. Then I can pass because I already have the field spell, and then next turn I can go ahead and make like Legadia, draw one more card, and then pop, and then I have Handtraps and whatnot afterwards as well to kind of prevent your plays. So overall here, I special summoned one time. And because we only special summon one time, you only effectively upstart off of the Maxi. So if we were to try to do this on turn 2, if we really prepared for it, we could also use Centurion True Awakening to stop Maxi if we really cared. If you were to, I think the most mileage you can get at Maxi is probably to unironically just wait till the draw phase, I guess, of the next turn, like turn 2, dropping Maxi. I think that's probably the best time that you can drop Maxi against Centurion. But I mean, you didn't really stop their setup in that case, which kind of also sucks. And then there's also the risk of like your opponent having Ash Blossom or Cult By for that Maxi anyways, so it doesn't resolve regardless. But well, long story short, Centurion doesn't need to special summon that much on their turn, and Voiceless Voice just doesn't special summon much, period, unless you do the Diviner line, in which case I think you special summon like 4 times, which still, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think is that many times. So you could just pass technically after special summoning Skull Guardian, just as your only special summon, and then you normal summon low, pass, and that's usually the play with Voiceless, so not very effective to maxi against this. It's just an upstart and can be completely ignored, so you don't even eat, in this case, the Ash Blossom or the Called By, because who really cares that you maxi here? So that's falling off as well for various reasons, and even if we were to use the mulcharmies, like this isn't going to be that insanely different from what we have. It doesn't make that big of a difference. So the amount of non-engine I have here in terms of hand traps, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I would have to significantly downsize on some of my other non-engine and some techs, but that's somewhat doable, I guess. I can remove like some copies of, like, I guess I can remove my triple tactics talent, thrust, wailing, a single copy of Abominable Chamber of Enchained. I think I can't afford to do that, honestly. Yeah, so we have that, and then we have like what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 cards I think I can cut. Or not 7 cards I can cut. 7 non-engine slots up to this point, and then that is 11, 14. So if I were to devote half of my cards to being like Maxi and mulcharmy Perulia, then I can only run so many hand traps and that actually like do things, and I still need to balance it out with engine, so it's just not going to end up working out that well, in my opinion, and we won't be able to really stop our opponent's plays that well, despite drawing into like a billion cards still. So essentially what I'm saying is, you know, if we had 40 cards of, 40 copies of Pot of Greed in our main deck, it's going to be really awful, because all we're going to be doing is we're going to keep drawing into Pot of Greed, which only allows us to draw into Pot of Greed, right? So that's not great. But if we had like, I guess, also not that realistic, but if we just mixed in some other cards like Raigeki, Ash Blossom, whatever, we could technically draw into those off of the Pot of Greeds, right? But, you know, we also have to draw a Pot of Greed to begin with, and then in that case, we don't really want we want the Pot of Greeds, and the Ash Blossoms are nice, but they don't really do anything in certain circumstances as well. Like, if we're going first, this is completely dead, right? Kind of. So Ash Blossom Jar Spring we can technically use against Maxi, right? So it's not dead in that sense, but if we have no plays for our opponent to like Maxi into anyways, like, might as well be dead, right? Ash Blossom, Maxi, the mulcharmy cards, all dead if you are going first to an extent, assuming we have like no engine, because we have too much non-engine, right? So if there's a balance between those things, and it's kind of hard to balance these things out, right? And kind of try to utilize them, I guess. So what I'm getting at here is going first is getting pretty strong, but I mean, there's some hope. I mean, for now, we're getting some kind of, well, hand trap-ish cards, or cards that effectively can be used as hand trap. So we have Vidos, the Eruption Dragon of Extinction, for example. So this is pretty decent. So during the main phase, if this card is in your hand, quick effect, you can target one card in a field zone, special summon this card to your opponent's field, and if you do destroy that card, then you can add to your hand or set one Ashen Continuous Trap from your deck. So this effect is optional, so you don't have to do it. So we can use this purely as a hand trap that is situationally just an upgrade to Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. So, for example, like with Tenpai, Ghost Ogre might be sufficient, but also you can still cult by the Ghost Ogre, right? But against like Gimmick Puppet or Therion or a lot of these other decks like Gishtira, right? The field spell Search is not going to be stoppable by Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. You can stop some other things, but the effect here to pop immediately field spell is a lot more valuable, and it can't be hit by Cult By. In fact, there's really, I don't think, much counterplay against Vidos, the Eruption Dragon of Extinction here. assuming you're playing some sort of field spell where you need to resolve the search. Not a whole lot you can do unless you're maybe playing like Yubel and you immediately summon Phantom of Yubel to protect Nightmare Throne. But aside from that, you're going to get fairly cooked, I guess. But I mean, if your deck doesn't care about the field spell, then that's a different story. So for example, I guess the Centurion field spell, kind of situational, and you can kind of play around it sometimes because it can't be destroyed under certain circumstances. But if you were to start with stand-up Centurion, we can immediately pop this with Vitos. So that's fairly valuable in that situation. So right now, at least, I think so. All these hand traps, just in general, or just hand traps in general, are kind of just too weak or not good enough to compete with like the engines that we have now. So I guess we'll probably be getting more hand traps in 2025 that compete better, but they're probably going to be more specific and less generic than something like Ash Blossom Drift Spring, or maybe there's going to be some conditions that make them not as useful if you are going first, because there are like several small issues with like Yu-Gi-Oh in general right now. And I don't know how long it's been, like how long this issue has kind of been persisting, but in general, going first, a lot better than going second. And one of your best going second options is, of course, to utilize hand traps, but hand traps are like getting worse now. And you can, of course, utilize hand traps going first and going second, which is problematic for the going second player, where you have to deal with like a full end board and then the hand traps in general, right? So hand traps like the mulcharmies are kind of good for the game in the sense that you know we won't have so much of that going first player oppressing the going second player with hand traps, despite the hand traps supposedly being the going second player's friend. Supposedly that's what they were supposed to be, I guess. But you're kind of getting oppressed by the going first player either way. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. But for the time being, I mean, we're getting interactions from like with just Unchained. We have interactions from the hand with Shervara. We have things that can trigger in the graveyard, just multiple that do things in the graveyard, like somewhat stinkily, I would add. And then we have back row and then actual monster effects. And of course, it's a one card combo because why not? So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.